Since August, the small West African nation of Togo has been engulfed in a national crisis. Hundreds of thousands of protesters have taken to the streets to demand presidential term limits. It is important to understand the context of these demands. The current president of Togo is Gnassingbé Faure, and he has been in power since 2005. And before that, his father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, ruled the country from 1967 until his death in 2005. At the time of his death, he was the longest serving ruler in Africa. Upon the death of Eyadema, the younger Gnassingbé assumed power through what can only be described as a military coup. Defying the constitution, which stated that power was to be handed over to the National Assembly President upon the death of the sitting president, Faure Gnassingbé assumed power with the help of the Togolese army. In response to this, massive protests erupted, in which over 500 people were killed. Following international pressure, Gnassingbé stepped down, only to hold a sham election later that year, which he won. The Gnassingbé dynasty have now held power in Togo for 50 years, and throughout that time, limited progress has been made. Togo is still one of the least developed countries in the world. With widespread dissatisfaction with the government, a coalition of opposition parties planned the protests to call for a restructuring of the term limitations of presidents. Gnassingbé is currently in his third term as president, after being re-elected both in 2010 and 2015. Both times under very controversial circumstances. Eyadema had actually introduced term limits in 1992, only to remove them in 2002, to allow himself to run once more for president in 2003. The opposition parties are asking for a reversal back to that constitutional amendment of 1992. So far, the government's response has been heavy-handed. Official figures put the death toll at 2, but there are concerns by the opposition parties that the figures could be much higher. The government of Togo has also resorted to blocking internet access to its citizens. Now, this is a tactic being increasingly used by repressive regimes around the world to silence dissenters and to limit organized protests. But this very short-sighted strategy has actually backfired against the Togolese government and is now costing them more than $300,000 daily. Gnassingbé now finds himself in a very precarious situation. Togo lacks the strategic pull to curry support from any of its regional neighbors or the broader international community at large. Gnassingbé is sure to find himself increasingly isolated. The Gnassingbé model of president for life is a dying breed. During the ECOWAS summit of 2015, an amendment was discussed to introduce term limits across the bloc. Only 2 countries dissented, the Gambia and Togo. Back then, Yahya Jammeh was still the president of the Gambia, but he has since been defeated in an election last year. Gnassingbé has promised to heed the calls of the people and introduce term limits, but the opposition parties fear that any amendment introduced would only take effect after Gnassingbé decides to relinquish power. The protests look destined to continue, with some even calling for his resignation. In the meantime, Gnassingbé seems able to consolidate political power through sheer force. But as protesters grow and multiply, it's looking more and more evident that the legitimate authority that Gnassingbé has over the people of Togo is waning.